I welcome you all on behalf of IYCN. So today we are organizing a webinar, as you can see on the science advice to policy making. What can learned society do to promote knowledge exchange? So our panelist today is Dr. Lorenzo Melchor. He's the policy analyst uh, for knowledge for policy conception methods unit at Joint Research Center, European Commission. Basically, he'll be touching on various aspects related to science policy, and particularly how European how there are different entry points to the you know policy making for scientists, how scientific knowledge can improve from a conceptual perspective to practical hands-on experience in policy making. He'll present different entry points, uh, you know, at European Union level and the main challenges that exist at science policy interface. And he'll be presenting a brief of the report on supporting and connecting policy making initiatives in the member states of European Union with scientific research. Furthermore, he'll be also touching on aspects related to IUPAC and IUYCN like learned societies, how they can help build strong and interconnected uh, science for policy ecosystems. So to begin with, before we begin with the main theme of lecture webinar, we will first like to introduce what IYCN is, and the agenda will go like this. First of all, Torsten will introduce what IYCN does and how it is making an impact in terms of enabling capacity building of youth, young chemists. Further, Dr. Lorenzo will be continuing on the main theme of webinar, and then we will have discussion and question and answer on our the webinar, the content and the curiosities that emerge out of those fruitful insights given by Dr. Lorenzo. And then Joe Skytana will briefly present how you can engage with us for a long term in terms of science for policy to enable the gap that we are working together for bridging the gap between science and policy. Now I hand over to Torsten to introduce IYCN.
Yeah, also welcome from my side to all the participants to today's workshop. The host of this webinar is the International Younger Chemists Network, the IYCN. We are an associated organization of IUPAC since 2017 with the vision to connect and empower younger chemists globally. And the IYCN has the goal and mission to support and advocate for younger scientists across the chemical sciences towards a globally sustainable future. And you can also see here all our social media that you can follow us on. And on this slide, you can see in green the countries where we have members currently. And membership at the IYCN is free, and anyone who is a chemist and under the age or up to 35 years old, or who has in the last 5 years finished a chemistry-related degree or postdoc training is invited to join our network. Next to the policy webinar that we are organizing, we are also doing a lot of other activities. Last year, we launched a mentoring program with a goal to provide early career chemists some career guidance. Then we organize several activities around sustainability, such as a global conversation on sustainability. We have also been running currently a survey on the mental health of chemistry students, researchers, and recent graduates. And we are every year running an experiment outreach competition to which are directed around the sustainable development goals. And all our past webinars that we have been organizing, for example, here are shown the ones on professional development, are all available on either the IUPAC or the IYCN YouTube channel.
Yeah, so let's formally welcome our panelist, Dr. Lorenzo Melchor, for today. He's a PhD in molecular biology, and with a 13 year of research career, as you can see in the genetics in Spain, and he has over 30 peer-reviewed publications. Furthermore, he also holds a master's in policy analysis. That's where the policy perspectives come into picture. And he's presently a policy analyst at the Joint Research Center at European Commission Science and Knowledge Service, where he is working for connecting and strengthening science for policy ecosystems across European Union. So before this, he has worked for different, as you can see, it's Spanish Foundation for Science and as science advice and diplomacy officer. So overall, we see that he's quite learned in that sense and will be enlightening us today for through his talk on how we can together bridge the gap between science and policy. I hand over now without wasting any much more time to Dr. Lorenzo. Thanks, thanks, Lorenzo, for taking your time to attend this. I hand over to you for your further presentation.
Thank you, Lovis, and thank you for the International Young Chemistry Network for this interesting opportunity to introduce you to the world of science advice to policy making. I think I need to be assigned as presenter to be able to share the screen, and I hope to share the right screen now. Okay, so I can be screen monitor 2, perfect, and if I click on here, are you able to see the presentation?
Yeah, we are able to see.
Okay, perfect. Well, once again, thank you for the introduction.
We see it in presenter mode. Sorry, we see it in presenter mode. That's the only.
You see the presenter mode?
Yes.
Okay. Let me change the screen to screen 1. And now?
Now it's good.
Now it's good. Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. It's been ages since I haven't used GoToWebinar. It was the first platform that I used like ages ago, before Teams, before Zoom, and WebEx even. But now I don't use it any longer. Anyhow, so my work here today is in giving you a little bit of an overview of what is science for policy, or what is science advice for policy making. But most importantly, it's also to trigger a discussion about the role of scientific associations, learned societies like the International Younger Chemists Network could do in promoting knowledge exchange. During the presentation, I'll give you this overview of science for policy. I'll tell you a little bit of the difficulties and challenges of the EU policy-making process, and the policy-making process at the European Union, and where the scientific evidence is informing the policy debate. But then later we'll talk about the challenges that are in this science and policy interface, and how we from the Commission are trying to put their instruments, policy frameworks, and organizations in order to promote a better evidence-informed policy-making process. But let's go and start with this presentation. Okay, needless to say that we all have lived COVID-19 moments, and in that crisis, science was put into the spotlight. Scientists were addressing the general public together with high political leaders about the COVID-19 situation and the different policies to manage the crisis. But as much as science was put into the spotlight, it also came to surface the frictions that are between science and policy. Sometimes the level of scientific uncertainty couldn't advise for a specific policy option, or in other cases, sometimes policymakers or politicians used science as a shield to explain their policy options, or rather, they even undermined scientific authorities. But in some cases, it worked well, and we must not forget that COVID-19 is only one of the many wicked and complex problems that our modern societies are facing. Climate crisis, climate emergency, or energy sustainability, but also the aging of population, and even social aspects as the increasing diverse societies or inclusion of migrants, etc., are all very complex topics that one ministry cannot tackle by itself, and that you need to bring on many different government departments, and also importantly, scientific information to feed the policy debate. But science and policy are two different worlds. And probably you as scientists are very familiar with how to develop research. You are very much interested in running the experiments and checking, being very precise, you may be very happy taking risks and failures. However, in the policy-making world, those aspects are not that important. It's quite the opposite. You need to manage the world, don't properly understand it. You are more directed towards dialogue, judgment, and building legitimacy of your policy options. Failure and risk is less tolerable than in science. That's why experimenting with policy options is also not that common, and many other aspects. But in basic, scientists and policymakers operate with different incentives, different pace, different timelines, and different languages as well. So that is why it is important to build bridges to bring science and policy a little bit closer. People, and there we can identify two different sets of people and organizations. On the one hand, let's distinguish clearly what is the role of a scientist in policymaking. When scientists engage with the policy debate, they have, according to Roger Pilk in his famous book, The Honest Broker in 2008, 4 idealized roles. The one that you may be most familiar with is the pure scientist. The pure scientist is a scientist whose main task is to produce scientific research, and they don't need to inform policymaking. Whenever they are called to provide policymaking, they simply state their scientific fact, their scientific finding, and they don't commit with the different policy options. The second type is the science arbiter. This is the type of scientists that mostly populate technical agencies. They are very much involved in the policy-making process, but to answer specific regulatory questions. Sorry, I got some noise in the back. And then we have 2 other different roles, the issue advocate and the honest broker. The issue advocate is a scientist that is providing policy options, but it's clearly advocating for a policy option in particular. The issue advocate may be a scientist who is using his scientific authority to push forward a specific policy option since for different reasons. It may be his scientific interest, but it may also be his own beliefs, his own policy preferences, ideology, etc. And the honest broker is the most idealized science advisor, the one that challenges all the policy options, whether they are not in favor or against or aligned with the scientific evidence that there is available, or even that they outline different policy options with its pros and cons, but they don't advocate for a specific option. That's the decision for the policymaker. And then we've got the role of boundary organizations. These are mediating organizations that can be part of the public administration or a scientific organization, and they produce information that is useful for policymaking and of scientific nature. They are there to promote knowledge exchange between both communities. For instance, boundary organizations could be a science office or a foresight office at the Prime Minister office of the government or at the General Secretary of the government. Also, it can be a parliamentary office of science and technology. Those could be mediating organizations that are part of a public administration. But in a scientific organization, yes, they could also exist, like public observatories, think tanks, or let's say policy units that are part of universities or research centers. They could well become this kind of boundary organization or boundary work. And also learned societies. I mean, there are some scientific organizations which are very, very focused on providing advice to policy making and informing the policy debate. So why we cannot consider them as such? But you'll see in the next few slides how difficult providing advice it is, because EU policymaking is very complicated. I'm not going to go into detail in this slide, but this is just for you to have an idea of how policymaking at the EU takes place. If you see, there are many different stages until a policy is finalized and is implemented. First, it needs to be part of a political agenda, of a political document, like these political guidelines for the next European Commission 2019-2024, that every year there is an annual State of the Union where the President of the Commission informs of their intentions for the next year. And then there is a dialogue with the Council and the European Parliament to actually agree on those priorities, and that's the Commission work program for the next year. Then it starts all the process of calling for evidence of documents, feedbacks, and public consultation, impact assessment. It goes to a regulatory scrutiny boards. Different documents are prepared. They are shared with many different Commission services. And then finally, it starts a discussion with the European Parliament and the Council in order to adopt and to transpose and to implement all of this. Okay, now you, as a scientist that you work doing research, are you familiar with any of these steps? Probably you are not. Even I work at the Commission, I'm not fully aware of what it entails each of these stages. So that is the reason why we keep telling science for policy is an activity that must be supported. But we'll go back to that later. We can see that scientific evidence is actually cherished. I mean, at least the European Commission is very much interested in getting scientific evidence. And the rule, the basic Bible of how to run policy making in the Commission, it's called the better regulation. And you can read in different documents, either in the better regulation communication, in the guidelines, or in the toolbox, different aspects, different areas where evidence-informed policy making or scientific communities or anticipation and foresight are referred. Policy evaluation, impact assessment, all of these are hooks for the scientific community to be engaged. Check this guideline. It is an important category of a stakeholder is the research community that might need to be specifically targeted. So this is the public administration as a whole in how policymaking operates, that they are mentioning the clear importance of bringing scientific knowledge into the policy table. So there are different steps where this can happen. And one of them is a stakeholder consultation and calls for evidence. On a weekly basis, the Commission opens different calls for evidence of different policies that are being discussed. And here you can see allocation of EU airport slots or European statistical system, etc., where they are asking people to provide evidence. Well, we have seen in some analysis or some studies that the level of engagement in this participatory process of industry and NGOs is way much bigger than the level of engagement of academy, of universities. Is this how we want public funding that is allocated to research and academia to give back to society? Maybe there is a niche there that we need to exploit. So let's see. There are some, having said that, there are scientific actors in the EU that are part of that intricacy or complex policy-making machinery. We've got the regulatory scrutiny board. This is a board with some civil servants of the Commission, but also external experts who are recruited for this particular purpose of checking, run evaluation, fitness, and impact assessment of any policy that is proposed. What are its pros and cons? How it's going to affect everything? There is enough scientific evidence to back this up or not. If they say a policy is not fit for purpose, they send it back. They give a negative assessment, and the policy needs to start or restart the discussion process. If they give a green light, it can go ahead in the next steps of the policy making process. But in order to gather scientific expertise, the Commission has different expert groups. Up to 700 groups of experts are part of the Commission machinery. And these are expert groups that meet regularly to solve some topics, to discuss and to help the Commission establish priorities and discuss about the policy. All their registry and their minutes are online. There is a transparency portal for that, and every meeting is recorded and summarized. There are very clear rules about how these experts need to operate, and within that expert group, we've got national civil servants, but also scientists, academics, practitioners, enterprise, NGOs, and other other stakeholders of interest. The EU agencies are other technical groups. These ones provide technical expertise. The European Agency for Medicine Agency, the European Environmental Agency, they are very essential to establish really technical indexes, technical guidelines for specific policies, the level of pollution in cities, or whether one drug is to be approved or not. The level or the responses of these agencies are have quite a lot of weight in terms of how to establish certain limitations. Two other scientific groups. One is the Scientific Advice Mechanism. This is a group, or this is a consortium of different actions. On the one hand, the Commission requests advice to the Scientific Advice Mechanism. It creates a scoping paper, and this scoping paper is sent to the group of chief scientific advisors. 7 scientific experts that 2-3 days a month are working for the Commission to discuss and to create these kind of documents. But they are also supported by SAPEA, which is the European Academies Consortium, composed of many different academies and federation agents, federation of associations, etc. That they provide to that scoping paper, they provide an evidence review report, as you can see here, either from cancer screening to the future of aging, the energy transition, but there are way many others. These reviews are produced by gathering group of experts, expert workshops, etc. But this report fits the scientific opinion that is issued by this group of chief scientific advisors, and that is later used and utilized by the Commission in different levels in their policies or legislation. And the Joint Research Center, which is the center where I have the pleasure to be working in. This is the Science and Knowledge Service of the Commission. It is like the think tank of the Commission, the research center of the Commission, that on the one hand is doing scientific research, but is also synthesizing the research that is out there in the whole academia and also industry to make it meaningful and useful for different Commission services, different Commission ministries in support of their policies. It has the level of a ministry. It is a Directorate General that is under Commissioner Maria Gabriel, and it's composed by more than 2,000 active scientists across 6 different sites: Brussels, Seville, Ispra, Karlsruhe, Pettengill, etc. And we have also what is considered knowledge centers and competence centers. The knowledge centers are centers where we pull together in a network fashion a lot of scientific research, and the competence center is more to build capacity on a specific topic, like the competence center for participatory and deliberative democracy. But anyhow, it is here in the Joint Research Center where I have the pleasure to work, and I work at a unit that is called Science for Democracy and Evidence-Informed Policymaking. We try to understand the challenges that are behind science and policy, and we try also to build capacity for evidence-informed policymaking within the Commission, but also across member states. And in the next few slides, it is here where I'm going to focus a little bit my presentation in introducing you a little bit about limits of science in policymaking, introducing you to our individual competence buildings, and how we work on science for policy ecosystems. For the sake of time, we are not going to work on the, I'm not going to focus on the society aspects and the deliberative and participatory democracy that we also support, but it is something that is of interest and perhaps for another occasion. So in our unit, we also do some research, and we've got people who work with tens, almost 100 of experts, mostly from the behavioral science perspective, to understand how policy making operates. And we understand one thing. One of the take-home messages of our Enlightenment 2.0 research project is that science is not the only thing in policy making. We have published up to date 3 different reports: Understanding Our Political Nature, which I'll talk about in the next slide; Technology and Democracy, which understands the influence of online technologies and social media in how it is affecting democracies; and Values and Identities, a report for policymakers to understand how to frame policy issues in such a way that it appeals to specific values or identities, or actually how little scientific evidence weighs when it collides or it clashes with our tribal identities, our own individual and groupal identities. But anyhow, what shapes our political behavior? So this report is a very interesting one, very easy to read. It has an executive summary of 2-3 pages that gives you a wide overview. But if you want to enjoy reading it, it's easy. And it describes the main challenges by which our political nature cannot driven exactly by scientific facts. And on the one hand, we have the current context of misinformation, misperception, and disinformation that we exist. And also the difficulties from a policy perspective to harness the collective intelligence of many different actors, many different government bodies to tackle the complex problems that we have. Climate change cannot be tackled only from the Ministry of Energy and Transition, but it must be a transversal policy that brings in different governmental departments. Also, we tend to think, and scientists do, that we are rational beings. Well, emotions play a big role, and sometimes we build the rational argument after we feel something or we have. Also, facts don't speak for themselves. You can say we cannot raise 1.5 Celsius degree. I mean, if we do, it's going to, I mean, the temperature of the world, it's going to be disastrous. Okay, well, what? How do you frame that scientific fact with a narrative and a framing accordingly to appeal to the people, appeal to the emotions of the people, to actually understand you better and say, okay, let's take action. Trust and openness, erosion of trust in experts and in governments, and we have seen, as we said in the beginning, with COVID-19 crisis, that some governments undermined scientific authorities. So evidence-informed policymaking cannot be taken for granted, and it is under threat in many of our democracies. But those are some of the limits. Let's go and talk about the individual competencies, because at the end of the day, science and policy, if they happen together, it happens because of people, because there are scientists and policymakers or people with scientific or policy backgrounds that cooperate. Okay, in our unit, we have described this set of competencies for policymakers as well as for scientists. And this is very important. We don't think that science for policy should be only a thing for scientists. We understand that policymakers need also to improve, and they need to be able to innovate in the way policymaking is done. They need to work with evidence and have data literacy, to collaborate, and to be able to advise the political level. When we are talking about policymakers, surely in your mind you are thinking in politicians, but they are just one of the type of policymakers that are out there. Let's talk also about the civil servants, about policy advisors, and research managers, etc., that are out there. And in the competencies for scientists, well, you need to understand policy to play policy. You need to know how to participate in policy making and build trust and be able to communicate complex scientific facts in a fashion that appeals and is understandable by many. This is, for instance, a focus on this competence framework for scientists. And you see each of these cluster of competencies have different competencies in it. In total, there are 27 competencies for scientists that we think should be worked. And we also, those competencies, we think it's a mixture of knowledge, something you know, skills, something you are good at, and attitude. Are you prone? Are you able to learn how to do certain things? And in January, we will launch a self-assessment tool so that you can check your own strengths and weaknesses and check also the progression level, like if this were a video game from very basic to advanced level. And another aspect that I want to raise here is that, okay, this is a competence framework, but we don't want a person to master all the competencies. This can also be run in teams or by teams, and check what each team member is very good at. Maybe in your organization, in your science for policy committee that you have there are people who are very good and in participating in policy making and understanding policy, but they are not that good in communicating. Okay, maybe they are the ones setting certain meetings, but then to those meetings you bring your other colleague that is able to deliver the message, because policy making is a team effort and it cannot be done just by one single person. Another document we have produced is this 10 top tips for researchers, how to achieve impact on policy. Please go Google it and check these tips in detail, because each of them could merit like 5–10 minutes of this presentation. But let me just emphasize that policy impact is a team effort, that you need to build trust, you need to understand policy and become bilingual, and be aware also of your own values and background when you are delivering advice or when you are participating in policy making. Anyhow, there are some of the tips, and please go online, as I said, and get it. If you want to learn more about this, and these are two materials that you can use: the Science for Policy Handbook, a really nice handbook with 10 chapters, and an online course of 1 hour to see how to maximize your policy impact through a role-playing game. Also, we have an in-house two-day course on capacity building for science for policy that we are now training tens of trainers in Europe to deliver those training exercises. Let's talk a little bit about the institutional capacity building that we also do. And this is what we frame as science for policy ecosystem. And for the last 2 years, we have delivered up to 14 workshops, bringing together boundary organizations and knowledge brokers to share experiences and propose policy recommendations to the countries we were doing this exercise. And you can see some of the products are here. These are 3 discussion papers that were produced for Greece, for Portugal, and for France, where we map what boundary organizations exist out there in these countries, both within the public administration or the scientific community, and their level of engagement. Those co-creation workshops I mentioned before, the discussions were fed with these discussion papers, and then we came back to our partners organizations in each of these countries with a workshop report with recommendations that were based on those discussion papers, but also on the feedback and participation of the people who attended these workshops. And one of the biggest efforts that we have done recently is the publication of this Commission staff working document on supporting and connecting policy making in the member states with scientific research. This is a document from the European Commission that provides a vision of how we think from the Commission staff service, okay, science and policy should or could collaborate, okay? And the whole purpose of this is to promote national and European debate on how we can improve our science for policy ecosystems, how we can promote more knowledge exchange opportunities so that science and policy talk to each other. And this is one of the findings in our analysis, is that there are many things happening in the European environment. Many different new organizations are established, like an Office of Science and Technology at the Spanish Parliament, or a Foresight and Strategic Planning Office in the Portuguese government. We also see a network of science advisors in ministries in Estonia, or the fact that the Czech Republic, through their Resilience and Recovery Plan, they have included building analytical units across ministries. Ireland is actually now undertaking a public consultation on how they can improve their science advisory structures. So we can see all this dynamism, but we see 3 challenges. One is that there is institutional fragmentation. We think there is a missed opportunity to build synergies and to strengthen the interactions even within the same country. Sometimes the boundary organizations don't know each other exist, or ministers, they aren't familiar with their own science advisory councils or science advisory units. Anyhow, the individual capacities, in our document, we think from our workshops analysis came through that either scientists think policymakers are not, they don't have data literacy, or the other way around. Policymakers saying that scientists are slow and don't provide, and their interventions, I mean, they could improve their communication skills. Okay, so those are individual capacities that should be considered. And then also the good governance of evidence use, making a nice framework of where the science ends and where the policy and the political decision starts. The document, I'm not going to go into detail. What it does is list all the Commission support instruments that are out there for member states to tackle each of these aspects. Either we provide support to build institutional capacity, to promote training, or to provide a code of practices of how scientific experts should engage in policymaking. And one thing is that this document had 2 target audiences in mind. One, the public administration with its better regulation system and the public administration reform language, the policy evaluation, the impact assessment, and the other one is the scientific community and the research ministers, because we see knowledge valorization and intersectoral research mobility. It's something that is out there, but for instance, for the intersectoral research and mobility, there is a lot of emphasis placed to moving scientists to industry, but not that strong emphasis to move science, to allow scientists or provide opportunities to scientists to experience working in public administration. In anyhow, there are many different tools that the Commission has in the research policy area that may, with little modifications, provide room for improving science for policy. So the document is taken forward to discuss at the Commission how we can offer member states to promote these debates at the national level. There's been planned an European conference on science for policy on 10th, 11th October, which is open for everyone. And we'll be making a public call for sessions where any organization, including yours, could get to send an abstract and be selected to be part of this conference. And last 2nd of December, the 27 EU research ministers discussed about this topic. And they said that science should play a role in informing policy making, that scientific coordination should be in place between different ministries as well, and that the Commission should support this debate. But now, in my last minute, I'm going to ask you, what can learned societies do to promote science for policy? I know I've been quite institutional in the last few slides, talking about the Commission, talking about member states, but what can you do as a learned society? Because I've read in your website that you've got a Science for Policy committee with really nice and interesting functions and objectives. Well, you are already doing something. Some other learned societies, they don't have this Science for Policy committee. Now, on top of having that group, these are just some ideas for learned societies to promote science for policy. And this is not just ideas that I can figure out, but rather I know examples of other learned societies that do some of this stuff. They establish their specialized committee, they run training exercises, participate in policy making, but also when you participate in the policy making or in policy debates, etc., have you defined your role and understand it? Are you going to play as a science issue advocate, or are you going to play as an honest broker? Have you discussed this internally? Make your voice and position heard in scientific international meetings. Engage with other stakeholders. Learn also from others. I mean, what's the level of engagement of your scientific association with NGOs or with industry or with other topics? Policymakers, for sure, yes, but other society actors. Run your knowledge exchange programs. I know there are learned societies that have their own pairing scheme to put together scientists and policymakers, or they run their innovation camps to come back to government with a set of policy proposals in a co-creation fashion. Write your own policy memos, briefs, or reports. That's also another area. Scientific articles, they are read by policymakers, but if you translated them into policy brief or policy memos, they have a way much bigger traction in the policy area. And also, if funding is available, hire your own policy officer, because that will make a huge difference. As I said before, we don't think, I mean, all the researchers should be doing science for policy, and researchers should do scientific research. On top of that, whenever and in some opportunities, they can do tech transfer and create their own businesses. They can communicate science and create their own communication companies or become science communicators, but also sometimes they can become science advisors, but if they have the support of learned societies like yours to teach how to write a policy memo, or to coach them as to how to talk to policymakers and discuss on a specific policy issue, I don't know. Those are questions that a policy officer does make a difference. So just to conclude, the Commission is promoting a debate on how to improve science for policy, and the staff working document that I briefly introduced you is one milestone in that regard. Science for policy requires competent professionals, boundary organizations, and interconnected ecosystem, as well as understanding the limits that in policy making exist for science. We believe there needs to be reforms in both the public administration side as well as in the research and innovation system. And lastly, it's something that I haven't covered, therefore it cannot be a concluding remark, but a notice. We need to promote deliberative and participatory processes where the dialogue between science, policy, and society is held. And with that, thank you very much for all your attention, and happy to take any question.
Thank you, Lorenzo. It was a really nice and insightful presentation, really covering all of the aspects from how we can from starting like the boundary organization, the scientific organization, and the policymakers, their connection, and then covering the whole different diverse aspects how European Union and your Joint Research Center is working towards bridging this gap, and further what we can do together. Definitely, we'll be deliberating upon how we can collaborate together in future works as well. And I mean, it's this recorded presentation will further work as a resource for continuous, because you cited the materials and you cited the resources that can be used for further knowledge about the science of policy. Thanks a lot. I mean, it's really going to benefit all of us. Now I hand over to Manuel. We have obtained certain questions through our registration forms, and we are also open to any questions that pitch in now, and we request our participants to post their questions in the chat in the Q&A box. Yeah, so Manuel, up to you now.
Yep.
Thank you.
Hi, Lorenzo. Thanks again for your presentation and also for the suggestion. So I have some questions from the audience, from the registration forms. The first one is, what are the qualifying degrees for pursuing a career in science policy as a policy analyst? So from your experience.
Thank you, Manu. In policy analysis, it's a career in itself. I mean, there are political scientists, sociologists, and many of social sciences. They can lead you towards policy analysis. Having said that, also people with hard sciences background, if you have a PhD or a degree in biotechnology, you could find your way into policy making or policy analyst through regulation or through policy analysis itself, because policy making in these complex aspects of environmental issues or etc., they may require also a scientific background. So policy analysis, you can get there with different degrees, but if you are a biotechnologist or a chemist, maybe it's sensible to take some basic understanding of policy analysis. In my case, I was a PhD, or I am a PhD in molecular biology, and I used to be a cancer researcher. And when I decided I wanted to work on this science and policy interface, also because I am a bit of a geek, I said, I'm going to take a master in policy analysis to fully understand it and to also get the understanding of the social sciences perspective, the political sciences in it. And well, I got my academic background, which helps me understand and liaise with the scientific community. And on the other hand, a little bit of understanding of how policy and institutions operate. But this is not a clear career path either.
Yeah. I know your experience, your career. So this is very interesting. So the second question is about one of the main challenges, which is the independence. How can risk to independence of researchers engaging with government be managed? So yeah, I think this is one of the main challenges, independence.
That's a very good question. And sometimes independence is overrated, okay? Because independence may be opposed to influence. But that is the reason why we keep asking about a science for policy ecosystem. Because it's not the same, a group of experts that you call in and you ask for advice and they give you independent advice, than, for instance, your in-house evaluation unit, policy evaluation unit, or science advice unit that you've got inside government. Those things need to work with different criteria and different, because their purposes are different. The scientific independence is needed, especially when you are a scientist who your main task is do scientific research. You are going to do the research you want, and then when you provide advice because you are called upon, I don't know, a crisis expert group that is created, okay, you can provide your advice and you can be independent in providing that advice. But also you need scientists also are able to play in the blame game scenario, and also scientists may not be independent at heart, and they may start pushing for a specific policy options that are either their preference because of their scientific understanding, okay, or because their own political beliefs, okay. So independency goes both ways, and that is why in one of the first slides I introduced you to the 4 roles of the scientist in a policy making, and how I distinguish between the issue advocate and the honest broker. The honest broker should be independent in all terms, but should also have high influence and credibility to in front of the scientific community.
Okay, we have another one. Do you think it is important the public and the policymakers know the scientific background of the policy decision? So, yeah, if they should have a scientific background on the topic, it's important or not?
It is important. In the staff working document, we refer to, I mean, your policies need to be informed by evidence, and if you are taking a policy that goes against the scientific evidence, as a policymaker, you should be brave enough to say why you are not going in favor of the scientific evidence, and treat public in an honest way, because okay, scientific evidence may tell you one information, but also what kind of scientific information you've got in hand. Or we have seen it with the COVID-19 situation. At the very first beginning, it was the advice provided by health and epidemiologists and the biologists and virologists. But maybe we should have also brought in much earlier the advice of sociologists and behavioral scientists, etc., to allow for specific policy measures. Okay? But yes, policies should be substantiated by science, and you need to be honest if you are taking one route or the other based on science or not.
Okay, we have the last question is, what can private scientific corporations do better to contribute to policy making? So scientific corporations.
When you mention scientific corporations, you mean companies, industry?
I suppose industry, yeah, I suppose that is industry.
I mean, industry played this role very well, and they play it as issue advocate most of the time, and they play it very nicely because they've got people dedicated to do this. They've got policy officers, they've got lobbyists, professional lobbyists that bring in their own scientists who are doing their science in these companies. And I mean, it's totally legit what they do, which is lobbying. Sometimes we have seen, it's true, that some decisions were that had been a strong lobby with scientific facts totally corrupted, right? I mean, the leaded oil is one of the most famous scandals that happened decades ago. But I mean, where is the role of scientific academia there also to get engaged in this policy debate and have it professionalized in such a way that you also counteract some of these decisions? But having said that, as I said, I mean, private companies do it very well in a professional manner.
Okay,
so this was policy briefs, memos, etc.
Okay, so this was the last question from the audience, and I don't know if Lovis or Torsten can have some questions. Lovis? No? Okay, I think he cannot. He's mute. So I think we can finish now. Well, Jose is now to finish this session, just presenting a little bit more about the group. Jose? Okay. Hi, Jose. Hi. So thanks again, Lorenzo, for your time and for presentation, and nice to see you.
Thank you, Manu. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for listening in. I'm just going to wrap up with some feedback that we're going to do as the Science for Policy Committee here at IYCN. And I would like to ask you if you would like to participate in our newcomer research survey we're going to do for public assessment of science and public policies. I'm going to share with everyone in the general chat the link to our survey, where we are going to engage with several questions and to identify better and understand the key factors in young chemists' perceptions, achievements, and the role of science for policy making, as we've seen in this presentation. This survey is part of a larger project where we have to amass the importance of science policy interface for the empowerment of young people and the pursuit of higher scientific education from the perspective, in this case, of young chemists and young researchers. And I would like to advise you all to please take a couple of minutes. It just takes 1-2 minutes to complete our questionnaire, and these will be formed as a more complete survey to be shared with the community throughout the study, to be either published or disseminated with our forms of scientific communication, and will be presented in an aggregated form so we can have a companies-based idea, so how these trends will be shifting as the time goes by. And I think it would be an interesting tool to get ourselves on with some data to really understand our public's interests and ideas on this subject. We can actually give up a better feedback on it and make our strong assertion based on this information that we have. So that's probably it, and give you all my greatest welcomes to if you are able to complete the survey, and we're also open to any questions, and we really appreciate your contribution. Thank you so much. So I don't know if I'm going to anyone else who has something to say. If not, in the name of the Science for Policy team here at IYCN, I'd like to thank you to all your attention. Thank you for the speaker also to an awesome presentation, and hope to see you again soon in the next webinar or next feedback meeting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I sincerely thank all the participants and the organizers, especially Dr. Lorenzo, who made his time to enlighten us in such a comprehensive manner regarding science for policy. We're really looking forward, and as we said, we'll stay in touch and look for further collaboration as well. And yeah, as far as this survey is concerned, we definitely need your support and to disseminate it in a wider range so that we know what scientists actually feel about science and policy, and how a driven solution can be brought out, like what scientists thinks that, you know, what should policymakers do, and what the gaps, how gaps from their perspective should be filled out, can come about through this survey. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to everyone. Thank you. So here we end this webinar. And before that, we would like to ask Lorenzo if you want to say something.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations on the organization first of your Science for Policy Committee, and also on this survey to understand what your members want to do and accomplish. I look forward to seeing great initiatives coming from you, and I hope I mean, this wide overview, sorry if it was too extensive, has given you some tools to help you in this internal debate. Good luck for everything, and don't hesitate to contact me for any follow-up that you think is worthy.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much. So we end up our webinar here.